So most of you guys already know that I'm Benita, and I work in planning and environmental resources, and I am going to be doing the NPDES training today. So NPDES is the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System and is enacted by the Clean Water Act of 1972. It permits point source discharges into the waters of the United States and is administered by the state board in the state of California. Permits can either be issued by the state board or by the regional board. For our agency, we have 2 Regional Water Quality Control Board NPDES permits, and the current ones we hold are the individual permits, which is also known as our consolidated permit, and that is required for discharging effluent into the receiving waters. That was adopted in October of 2015, and the renewal for those are every 5 years. We also have a general permit from the regional board that regulates de minimis discharges, which is discharges to surface waters that pose an insignificant threat to the water quality. That was adopted in June of 2015. So what is a discharge point versus a monitoring location? The discharge point is the physical location where the effluent or recycled water enters the receiving water. And the monitoring location is the physical location where the representative sampling and or continuous monitoring is conducted. Here are the discharge points that are listed inside our consolidated NPDES permit. And the only new one that we've added since we got the new permit is the S003, which is the stormwater for RP2. That was previously regulated under a general industrial general stormwater permit by the state board. So these are the compliance monitoring locations listed in our permit. And Nell wanted me to remind you guys that because, this MINF3A, which is the RP5 influent, the theoretical flow weighted value between the RP5 influent pump station and the RP2 lift station, that those samples have to be all collected on the same day. So in order for us to do a proper flow weighting, those have to be collected on the same day and not like one on like Tuesday and one on Wednesday. So I can't actually do anything with the data if they're collected on separate days. So that's the only thing. Okay, recycle water. All right, and here are some aerials for the different monitoring locations at our facilities, and also I included the type of parameters that are monitored at these locations. This is for the RP5 influent. This is for the RP5 effluent. And this is for Carbon Canyon influent and effluent. So for each of our facilities, we do have numeric effluent limitations for each of them. And we have a BOD and TSS average monthly limit of 20 milligrams per liter and an average weekly limit of 30 milligrams per liter. We also have an ammonia nitrogen limit of 4.5 milligrams per liter as an average monthly, and also a total chlorine residual instantaneous max limit of 0.1 milligrams per liter. I also included, sorry, wrong one. Okay. In your Know Your NPDES permit, you'll Know Your NPDES permit sheets. There's a RP5 and a Carbon Canyon side. I just wanted you to know that there's a front and back. So whichever facility you work for, just go with that. So for RP5 and Carbon Canyon effluent, we have a dioxin limit on the RP5 effluent. And I'll just go into more of a discussion later about that. We also have some disinfection byproducts like chloro-dibromomethane and dichlorobromomethane for both of the facilities. And we also have a copper limit on the Carbon Canyon effluent. We also have some narrative effluent limits, such as the pH range has to be within 6.5 and 8.5 for discharges to surface water, and the oil and grease cannot be visible, and the TDS limit is 550 milligrams per liter, agency-wide 12-month running average, and the total inorganic nitrogen is 8 milligrams per liter, agency-wide 12-month running average. We also have some recycled water specifications that are that include the turbidity and coliform. I'm not going to go into any detail, but you can see here and also on your Know Your NPDES. The concentration time has to be a minimum of 450 milligram minutes per liter, and the modal contact time has to be a minimum of 90 minutes. We also have some receiving water limitations that we meet by going out there and looking at the waters for doing their weekly observations. And we also have some weekly measurements that we need to take, DO, temp, and pH in the field. I don't know if there's pH, but DO and temp. For the DO, we cannot deplete the oxygen, the DO below 5.0 milligrams per liter. And for the temperature, we cannot go above those listed for those specific months. And we also have a methyl mercury limit of 0.3 milligrams per kilogram for the fish. So here are our creek monitoring locations for Cucamonga Creek and Chino Creek upstream and downstream. And these are the parameters that we analyze at each of them and their required frequency. So this last year, we were expecting El Nino rains, which never happened. But in preparation for it, I was asked when we can actually discharge secondary effluent, and we might have actually had to do it if we actually had any rain. So secondary effluent discharge is allowed when we have a 20-to-1 dilution in the creek, and it has to be exclusive of any upstream POTW flows. And it has to be disinfected and dechlorinated, and the effluent limitations are slightly more lax for BOD, TSS, and coliform, but the pH still has to be between 6.5 and 8.5. And there's quite a bit of monitoring that's required, including all the annual monitoring parameters that we normally do. So we tend to not want to discharge secondary effluent unless we have to. So hold on, previous. So what we recommend to do is actually discharging non-Title 22 recycled water when we have a 1-to-1 dilution in the creek, and that's also exclusive of any flows from upstream treatment plants. And in this case, the filter loading, the DT, and the DT, which is the modal contact time, and the concentration time do not apply, and there's no additional sampling or monitoring required. So occasionally we do have some shutdown and gate closures occurring at our facilities, and it's important to inform compliance and lab of any shutdowns or the gate closures. This is usually anything that's long-term, more than a few hours, usually lasting several days to weeks. And in this case, like RP5 effluent gate closed today, and that usually extends through an entire summer. So there's very limited sample and monitoring during this time, but we ramp up recycled water monitoring because all the sampling that was done in the final effluent is now going to be done in the recycled water. So that has to be done daily instead of weekly for TDS. And when the gates reopen and processes come back online, we have to make, you need to inform us so that we can make sure all the monitoring that was missed is, that we catch up on it. So sometimes our required annual monitoring is in July, and if the gates aren't open, we can't collect the final effluent sample. So we have to defer that sampling until after the gate reopens. So we have a lot of continuous monitoring meters out at our facilities, and we do have compliance flow meters that need to be calibrated at least annually, and we have all the other compliance meters have to be calibrated in accordance with the manufacturer's specifications. For out-of-service meters that are expected to be out of service for an extended period of time, for pH and turbidity, which have effluent limits, you can determine compliance by averaging grab samples taken at a minimum of 4-hour intervals over a 24-hour period. For everything else without limits, such as influent pH and effluent EC, you can obtain a representative grab sample each day the equipment is out of service, or we can also use composite samples for the missing data. But not all the monitoring locations are sampled daily, so you need to let me know so I can let the lab know what analysis to actually do on those samples. So I'm going to go through a few recent compliance topics. I don't want to call them issues, but they have kind of arisen because some of these are a little bit alarming.
So it's topics.
Kind of. Well, not so recent anymore. So in my last slide, I mentioned that flow meters, compliance flow meters have to be calibrated at least on an annual basis. The reason for this is that our permit tells us that, but also the regional board, they come out for their inspections each year and ask us for our calibration logs. So because of those calibration logs, he can see when the last calibration occurred. And if there's more than a 1-year gap between the calibrations, then we are in trouble. So compliance flow meters include anything, that all the influence, which for here, it's like RP2 lift station, RP2 recycle, RP1 to RP5 bypass. And up there, it's RP4 lagoon to RP1. And I don't think RP4 lagoon to RP1 has been calibrated anytime recently. So that's one of those ones that we recently added in because it is used to calculate our influent so that we don't double count any of our influent flows. We also have effluent meters and also recycled water meters that are used in the recycled water spreadsheet. During 2014, 9 compliance flow meters were identified as not calibrated during the 2014 calendar year. And so the regional board has the right to issue a notice of violation, but we haven't actually gotten one yet. But I'm not going to say that we aren't going to get one. So, and then we do have some analyzer issues that I'm going to kind of go over. I have two examples of this. And so normally when you look at the data, as long as it's within the within the range and it's not, there aren't any alarms going off saying that you've exceeded any limits, you kind of tend to ignore it. But just because the values might not be exceeding limits doesn't mean that they are correct. So instrumentation does calibrate most analyzers weekly. And so my first example is RP1 Effluent EC. From February and March of this year, we had 50% and 27% of all the EC values that were under 700 micromoles per centimeter. So that means that I had to invalidate 50% of the data for the month of February. And when I could, I used the lab EC data to fill in some of the gaps. But we didn't have a very robust data set to actually, I mean, if I did a cutoff of even like 800 or 900 micromoles, which is more in the range of what EC should be on our influent, then I would have had like no data. So yeah, that was one of the issues. And then we had another one, a 001A at Prado, Effluent EC. And as we all know, that the EC and TDS are pretty well correlated. And that means that 001A and 002 effluent should be very similar in values. So I'm going to show you in the next slide where all the EC data was for, up here was the metered 001A EC. And this is where it's kind of hard to see between the two, the dark blues and the light blues in this, but it's like between the dark blue and the greens. That's 001A effluent and then 002. So this should really be down here. And because TDS, these are TDS data, and they're fairly well clustered together, very, very clustered together. So that means that this really, they should be very similar in value. And since then, I think the values have been dropping. So I also show lab EC, which is also down here. So this is what to look for. If you see strange values that are really out of range, especially for effluent, to just have someone look into it. And for earlier, I said that we do have a dioxin limit of 0.14 picograms per liter at our RP5. Did I already say RP5 effluent? But yes, that is a very low limit that they apply like a 10 to the -6 factor to it because dioxin is cancer causing. Mm-hmm.
Benita, we've not discussed dioxin a lot with operations staff.
Mm-hmm.
Can you and or Nell talk a little bit about what dioxin is or what would cause our influent and effluent to have dioxin in it, just so we can kind of get a little bit of an understanding of why we would see this and why we would have a limit for this.
Okay, so dioxin is actually something that stems from usually like incineration, paper pulping, because of the chlorination of organics, and it's usually a byproduct of that. So we're not quite sure where it's coming from, so that we are conducting a study, which I'll discuss later. But the reason why it's such an issue is because it is so toxic. And it is cancer causing. I don't know if you remember in 2004, there was some dioxin poisoning of a Ukrainian presidential candidate that made his face look like it was melting off. So that's what it cut. You know, it's not a good thing. It's like you don't want someone that you don't want to ingest water that has that. But this limit is to protect even that 1 in a million chance that someone could get sick over it. So is that okay? All right. The reason why we have the limit is because we did see one sample in the previous 5 years that had resulted in a value exceeded the 0.014 picograms per liter. The test is very expensive. I asked Nell this morning, and it was $525 per test, and we've been doing testing like it's going out of fashion. So. And so we are conducting a study, and our first step was to do source water monitoring. And we didn't find any levels reportable in our source water. But we also conducted trunk line monitoring down in the southern service area. And there have been reported values even in residential areas, which goes to show that it's not simply an industrial type issue. And in our influence, we do monthly monitoring at RP5 influence, quarterly at Carbon Canyon influent, and RP1, RP4 we have annual. So we actually had reportable values at every facility. So it's coming in at our plants at every facility. So initially, the reason why we haven't previously seen it is because we didn't look at it at such the lower detection limit.
Right. It's
Yeah.
the low levels we weren't looking at. Even that level is not really measurable.
Yeah.
There's really no lab equipment that can measure that. So
Yeah.
when we get a hit, it means we're above the limit.
It's like yes or no. And so in our effluent, we actually have not had any reportable ones. That goes to show that the wastewater treatment process does remove dioxins in the solids. And Craig is currently conducting a local limit study that will do additional sampling in the industries, but we haven't done any specific industries just yet.
So from an operational standpoint, is there anything we can do treatment process-wise within our current facilities and existing unit processes to improve our capture and to reduce the potential of an effluent limit exceedance? Is there anything we can do, or is it for us pretty much business as usual?
I think it's business as usual. I think you guys are removing it. It's not.
It goes out in solids.
Yeah.
So if you have, like the recycle tends to show a lot. So the more solids that we see in the recycle sample that recycles from RP2 to RP5.
Okay.
Sometimes
so that would
we
be
see
one
some higher levels. So the
right.
one thing that you potentially could do is reduce suspended solids when you recycle.
Got it. So
But
improve our belt press
yeah.
capture
Yeah.
so that we have less solids coming back around to RP5.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's a good tip. Thank you.
Okay. And that's it. If you have any questions, just ask me. Feel free to ask me now or over email, phone call, anything.
I have a question on the recycle flow at Carbon Canyon. To keep the minimum of a half MGD going to the creek for the annual, do you keep track of that? So if we met our requirement for this year, can we shut that completely down like we do at RP5 so we don't have any flow going out during the RW peak demand season?
I think so, because we do still have flows going through the wetlands. So the wetlands, I think, is a half an MGD flow, or about a half an MGD flow. What is it? Yeah. So I think it should be enough. No one's ever told us that we had to keep a minimum flow inside the Chino Creek.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So as long as we have either the wetlands at approximately half an MG or Carbon Canyon at half an MG, we should be fine.
As long as there's still something flowing in there.
Before we jump into the next segment, a couple, and these are all things that I know all the staff already knows, but I just want to take the opportunity to reiterate. 20-to-1 dilution, if and when we are at that point, even though we've met, you guys have verified that we've met those requirements for 20-to-1 dilution and for that alternate discharge, it still requires supervisor and deputy manager approval, because just because we meet those requirements doesn't mean we are going to authorize exercising that option, right? So it's going to depend on plant conditions, storage capacity, rain forecast. You know, if we see that, hey, we've got another couple of storms right after this, those are all decision factors that we would lean on to make that decision. Same thing for the 1-to-1 dilution. The other one is manual monitoring. I know Benita provided some minimums, but definitely check in with supervisor and or deputy manager at the time, because we would likely require more frequent monitoring than just the minimum that's required to meet our permit requirements, just for control and to ensure that we've met compliance requirements. And then just as standing reminder that all you guys have been fantastic about making sure we take care of any potential compliance issues, right? If we think there may be a situation where we have to look at data to make sure we haven't had a compliance violation, any type of situation like that that has a question mark in your mind, you need to notify supervisor and or deputy manager so that we can get involved with that evaluation, and that way we can make notification if necessary right away. Because on some of these things we have a pretty short amount of time to make notification. And then just a last reminder, this has kind of been a standing thing for many years. It is expected and required that all operations staff know the limits that are listed on this Know Your NPDES permit. So if those limits are listed here, at any given time, your supervisor, your deputy, your senior starts having a discussion with you about one of these limits, you are expected to know these, okay? I did have a staff tell me that was really challenging for them, and so I said, that's fine, then you better have this on you every shift, okay? So if you need to reference it, that's fine, but you need to know this and or have it on you so you can reference it, okay? And that's all I have.
Okay, thank you.